What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the WHL show. We got Andy Parker here. So you've had an interesting journey to get to where you are today. How did you find a job that you were passionate about?
I had an interview at a firm called Solomon Brothers, which it was an institutional brokerage firm, which at the time was very similar to Goldman Sachs. Solomon and Goldman were viewed as, kind of competing firms, and Solomon Brothers, stupidly, I think, in retrospect, sold themselves, and now they're part of Citibank. The name Solomon Brothers doesn't exist anymore, and I don't know if I knew I was going to be passionate about it, but back then, when I started in that business, Wall Street was a place where you could get paid well. It was probably similar to working in Silicon Valley now, or being in venture capital. It was a place where you could do well, and so that became a place where I wanted to work. And it was interesting to me. My first job was in derivatives, options and futures and things like that, and it was fun.
Knowing what you know now, what would you tell people in their 20s about how the basics of understand their financing and what to be aware of?
For young people, in terms of saving money and investing it, I think trying to time the market, pick when market's, low and it's going to go high is impossible. And so I think if you're a young person and you can save a little bit of money every month, just put it into an investment portfolio, which primarily for young people will be in the stock market. And there will be periods where the stock market goes down for 5 years in a row, and then it'll go up for 10 years in a row. But I think, if you're in your 20s and you're not going to retire these days, probably not until you're in your 70s, you got plenty of time for it to work.
What's more important to invest in, yourself or assets?
I mean, clearly, investing in yourself is more important, because the more you invest in yourself, the more money you'll make and the more money you can put into investments. Yeah. But to try to improve yourself, I think, is the most important thing you can do.
When you're investing in yourself, you're trying to get better at whatever it is, whether it's your health, your wealth, your relationships. What are some things that have helped you out in life to be able to grow? Because I'm sure it wasn't always green pastures. Like, I'm sure there was some ups and downs.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think it's a combination of keeping yourself physically fit, keeping your brain occupied. I regret not learning how to speak Spanish, but
you and me both.
But I think trying to learn new things along the way. For me to have worked on Wall Street and be in finance for as long as I've been, and not having gotten an MBA is rare. There are a couple of other ways you can do it. If you're in finance, there's a thing called the CFA, called Certified Financial Analyst, which is actually, I think, harder than getting an MBA. It takes at least 3 years. And I think last year, largely because of COVID and there weren't study groups, only 25% of the people who took the test passed it. It's brutal. But if you're in finance and you're interviewing for a job and they know that you have a CFA, I think that gives a lot of credibility.
There's probably been challenges in your life to be able to get to where you are. How did you get through those challenges?
I guess just not ever giving up. Regardless of what happens, always think that there's some solution and just keep trying to find it. When you're trying to get a job and somebody says no, that may not be no, that may just be not now. And so, you don't want to be a pain in the neck, but, keep in touch with the person. Also, I think if you're looking for someone to do something for you, the more you can do stuff for them. Let's say you're trying to get a job, any kind of information that you can send to the guy who you wanted to hire you to say, hey, I thought this was interesting, I thought I'd show it. The more you can do things like that, where you're actually, instead of asking them for something, you're actually giving them information, I think that's good.
Yeah. Well, I think that's such an important point. I learned a while back the give, take principle.
Right.
Give 3 times before you are ready to receive something.
I like that. I haven't heard it kind of put in that same perspective, but I think that makes a lot of sense. It's funny. I have a little fund that I invested in. Who the guy who's head of research, he sends out this weekly email, And so a couple times I sent him emails and I said, hey, I liked your email, here's something you might take a look at. So he actually knew a guy who I'd also been reading his emails. And so we ended up having lunch a few months ago in New York. And we were talking about this. And he said, one interesting thing that he's been doing is when he reads something or sees something and there's a person involved, he'll either email them or call them up and try to set up like a 10-minute Zoom or 15-minute Zoom meeting just to talk to them, which I thought was just a brilliant idea.
You've traveled to some pretty cool places throughout your life. What are some places that people should go to?
So it's interesting. I lived in Chicago for 10 years because when I worked in New York for 3 years, and I got transferred to Chicago. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go to Chicago. I'll work there for a couple of years, and I'll come back to New York. And I got there, and I thought, wow, this is such a fantastic place. Then I ended up getting married there. I had my first son. I never wanted to leave. And then the company that I was with at the time, Morgan Stanley, asked me to move to London.
Oh,
And so I moved to London and worked there for 3 years. And then they wanted me to move to New York, which is basically, I never wanted to move to New York, but ultimately I did, and now I've been here for a long time. But while I was in London, I traveled to a lot of cities. Like my wife and Dawn and I have gone on some crazy trips where there's a company in Canada called G Adventures, which is a travel company.
okay.
And their trips are not expensive. And we did a trip to Kathmandu and Tibet.
Oh,
And then we did a trip to Vietnam where we took a boat up the Mekong River.
Yeah.
So we were actually in Israel sitting at a bar in Jerusalem watching TV when the Boston bombing happened. And we're thinking, how crazy is that? So,
yeah, wow. I always tell people when you see great, you start to process different things in your mind on how to actually be great. So when you see these different things in different countries and different cultures, I feel like you probably see something in Africa that you would have never expected to see, something in Israel that you would have never expected to see, something in London that you would have never expected to see. What are some of the things that you've seen that have gave you a different perspective on the way you look at things in America?
the one thing that you realize is that regardless of people's position in life, there's this kind of the same percentage of people that are happy and unhappy.
Interesting.
You know, you're in the middle of Africa where people are living in little huts, and you know, people are walking around, they're smiling. You know, obviously there's certain kinds of poverty which probably change that, but I think the human condition is such that things get normalized. You know, if we had a room full of billionaires, there would be some that would be grumpy and there would be some that would be happy.
Thanks so much for doing this interview today. What's one thing that you would leave everyone with?
Don't give up. You know, regardless of what people tell you, no matter how much, how many no's you hear, there's always a way to find a solution.
All right. Andy Parker for you. Thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure.